which is the tariffs were mainly tactical to get non-economic concessions. I think that is dissipating, and there is a sign that some of the tariffs will stick.
The US stock market promptly fell after the announcement, and Manchester United say plans for a new 100,000-seater stadium will create thousands of homes and jobs. It's part of a wider regeneration project of the Old Trafford.
Radio app and via your smart speaker.
John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion.
It is really good to have you with us here on Pienaar and the Friends, an hour of good conversation in good company. Tonight is Tim Montgomerie, the founder of Conservative Home, now political commentator, and Rachel Cunliffe of the New Statesman. Tim, what's your thought for the day?
Well, my thought for the day is more of a question for you, John. Although it's perhaps you can see it as a rhetorical question. I've been obsessed today with the new Manchester United Stadium. And now it looks a little bit like a circus top. I don't know whether all of our listeners have seen it, but Dan Hodges, the Mail on Sunday commentator, said, if there's any public subsidy that goes into the development of this stadium, there will be riots. Now, of course, he's a Liverpool fan, you're a Crystal Palace fan. Now, it's an interesting question, though, because if this was just a car plant or just a general manufacturing site, and it was regenerating part of Manchester, people would be happy, probably. Most people would think, yeah, that's fair enough. But, of course, the idea of potentially subsidising a football club, which people sort of are rivals to, it sort of raises people's heckles. Yeah. But actually, this development, a 100,000-seater stadium, built probably in 5 years' time, if it goes to plan, will be a big bonus for Manchester, for the economy, yes, for the region. But of course, it will also help Manchester United.
Yes.
But it brings home to people who love football, and football is a nearer thing as a religion to some people, is the politics of subsidy are never simple.
No.
And
no.
And I think Andy Burnham, the great Mayor of Greater Manchester, is very much in favour of this project. And I think there will be public money. But how does a Crystal Palace fan feel about something like this?
I don't know if you've ever been down our way to Crystal Palace to Selhurst Park.
When you were sharing the ground with Wimbledon, I used to go there twice a season.
Okay, so that was a good many years ago. And I can tell you that since then the ground hasn't barely changed. My seat in Block C in the main stand, it feels like it was built for a 10-year-old. And the ground is rickety. I mean, the facilities are not great. It is not like a space-age circus, big top circus like Man United's going to be, but we love it. Do you know what? We love it, Tim. I'll tell you that. We're about 2 feet from the pitch at the front. Yeah. It's raucous, it's loud, it's intimidating for the opposition, and we take a perverse pleasure in the fact that it's just so rubbish. That's what I'd say about
your way of answering my question.
Yeah, absolutely. Rachel, what's your thought for the day?
I have no thoughts on football stadiums, I'm afraid.
Shocking.
I do have thoughts on COVID, though, and 5 years since, we all started the trajectory into lockdown, and I always remember when it was, because it's my husband's birthday, and I remember very vividly 5 years ago, we were meant to be having some friends over for dinner for his birthday, and in the end, the man came, his wife did not come because she worked at a hospital and she suddenly had to work last minute. And we spent the evening playing Carcassonne, the board game, and talking about how we definitely weren't worried. And there's this COVID thing, like it was a bit anxiety-inducing, but we didn't have to worry about lockdowns like anything like that. And that was this time 5 years ago, so sort of early March. And I just feel that as a country, there is so much of that time period that we have just basically got collective amnesia over, and we have tried very hard to forget the anxiety, forget the panic, the sort of panic buying blue roll and pasta and all of that, and what it did to us as a nation in a sort of quite deep psychological scarring kind of way. Lucy Easthope, who is this, she works in emergency planning and disaster management, and she wrote a book called When the Dust Settles, which is about her career in disasters in general. And at the end, she has a chapter on COVID, and she writes, "We're all disaster survivors now." And I don't feel like we've kind of grappled with that. I think we've kind of really tried to move on from it. The sort of financial impact, the economic situation that we're in now as a country is very much to do with the money that was spent during COVID, the grief for people who lost loved ones, but also things like mental health. A lot of talk this week about Labour government trying to cut benefits and the outrage that a high proportion of young people are in work, and no real conversation about the fact that this is the generation of people who, for 2 years of their life, school life or university life, were kind of locked away at home, and some of them managed and did very well, and some of them really didn't. So 5 years on since that, and maybe a bit of thinking back and remembering quite what we went through, and that it may still be having consequences now.
Right. A good thought. Thank you for that, Rachel. Now, look, at this moment, I want to bring you some breaking news. Literally, as you saw, my colleague there brought this into me, this piece of paper. I have in my hand a piece of paper. And what it tells us is, I'll read it to you. The U.S. State Department in joint U.S.-Ukraine statement says the U.S. will immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine. So, some sort of progress, and I've got a further statement here, which I'll read to you in a moment. It doesn't give us a great deal of detail, but it does tell us in this initial statement that the block on intelligence to Ukraine, which has been of such a help to Vladimir Putin and exposed troops on the ground for Ukraine to such extra peril, that has now been lifted. And Ukraine has also, it is said in this further statement, accepted in principle the idea of a 30-day ceasefire. That presumably doesn't go into any further detail, but that presumably leaves the ball with Russia. Do they therefore accept these terms? Because that would need to be the other part of that unfinished sentence. However, the intelligence block is lifted. Arms can now resume. What do you think, Tim? I mean, it is shocking that ban was ever there.
Yeah, well, I watched an interview with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, yesterday, in which he was asked to justify the pausing of intelligence sharing. And he said, well, it's a way of bringing Ukraine to the negotiating table, which I wasn't really convinced with. We've been on this programme sharing sort of Trump and Ukraine narratives for a while, John, and I largely defended or tried to defend and understand what America was doing in our exchanges.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand or defend the pausing of intelligence sharing. And, last week, the horror...
And the supply of arms.
Absolutely. The horror last week of Trump saying, when Putin had used the cover of that intelligence pausing to launch extra attacks on the infrastructure of Ukraine, to say, well, that we would have all done that, wouldn't we? No, we wouldn't have done. And so, I don't know why America took that action, but at least it's now Ukraine will get the intelligence sharing it needs. And finally, the ball will be in Putin's court. If there is going to be this offer of a ceasefire, will Putin take it up?
Yeah, what are you thinking right now, Rachel?
I'm just remembering that astonishing quote from Keith Kellogg, who's Trump's Ukraine envoy, last week about the suspension of intelligence sharing. And he said it's like hitting a mule with a 2x4 across the nose. It gets their attention, making it very obvious that this was a very dramatic, very crude way of essentially blackmailing Ukraine to the negotiating table, but without, it would appear, any kind of equivalent persuasive action on the Russian side.
Yes.
And we should be very clear that Ukrainian soldiers will have died because of this. This was immensely damaging.
Yeah.
And to talk about it in that sort of very flippant way, well, we've got their attention now, is when discussing an ally of the US, or a country that is supposedly still an ally of the US, is absolutely shocking. I mean, if it does lead to a ceasefire and some kind of lasting peace, if it does get them both around the negotiating table, if there are further concessions that the US is able to get out of Russia as well as Ukraine, then great. I think everyone wants this war to end, but I don't think in any way that justifies the suspension of intelligence sharing, and I think it is a very, like I said, a crude and dramatic lesson to other countries that consider themselves America's ally, as to the kind of reliable ally that the US is, or in fact is not.
Can I just add, if I may? Look, we can look back, and we should look back. People will be looking back through the period that we have just lived through for a very long time, I think, because it's been an extraordinarily discombobulating experience for America to behave the way it has. Let's just hope, though, some of this statement, though, is quite encouraging. So it says here, the US State Department, both delegations agreed to name their negotiating teams and immediately begin negotiations towards an enduring peace that provides for Ukraine's long-term security.
Yes.
Now, if this is the beginning of America recognising what Europe has been demanding all along, you can't just have a ceasefire. There has to be underpinnings of long-term security of Ukraine.
Yes.
Let's hope this is the sort of thing you would have expected from America, the America most of us have grown up with over recent years. It's not the thing we've been getting from America over the last few weeks. But this is almost like a return to normality. Now, it's just one statement on one day, and so let's not over-welcome it yet. But if this is the result of the sort of negotiations that Keir Starmer and others have been doing behind closed doors, maybe it is the beginning of America realising, just as the stock market reactions to the ridiculous tariff policy has produced a resumption.
Which have been doubled down on by Donald Trump today, where Canada is
he hasn't yet
concerned.
acted on them, though. The rhetoric is doubled down.
Well, he's going to double the steel and aluminium tariffs. That is an announcement. And
when will that happen, though? Announcements don't always
in a couple of days. That's going to...
I love how Tim's defence of Donald Trump is, don't worry, you don't have to believe anything that he says at the moment.
Announcements do have a habit on tariffs of not becoming policy.
Well, we'll come back to tariffs in a short while. But look, Marco Rubio, I've just been handed this to Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, who was at the table in Jeddah on the American side of the table. He says the ball is in Russia's court, and I guess that will be true. And we're going to see the test of American resolve here too. That if that's the case, if they have some sort of terms which they are now ready to put to Russia, and if Putin does not buy them, and so far he's shown no inclination to accept any terms for a ceasefire, then what? Then what does America do? We've seen the most colossal pressure exerted on Russia, on Ukraine, by the Trump administration, to a point which was frankly shocking. Nothing on Putin, and now we'll see whether they're going to put their action where previously their mouths were, because we've seen rhetoric in the past about putting pressure on Russia. I recall a good many months ago now, there was word from the Trump team that if it comes to it, we will just pour weapons into Ukraine and give it to Ukraine. That just went quiet. And the most recent thing that we heard was the possibility of more sanctions on Russia, including banking sanctions. And this against a country which has already suffered about as much as can be imposed by America on banks and on trade. There's almost no room for any more. And so the threat was pretty much meaningless. So what more will Donald Trump do? We'll see how that goes. And now we'll also see from these statements that as you say, the Ukrainian side and the American side will put together negotiating teams, and that is where the rubber hits the road. And we can cross now live, I'm told, to Jeddah, where Tim Walz and Marco Rubio, side by side on the American side, are addressing the media. Let's go there live.
Well, as has been clear from his first day as president, even as a candidate, President Trump is a president who wants to be a president of peace. His goal in this entire process has been to bring about an end to this war. It's a terrible war, a costly war, a bloody war. And his number one interest is ending this war once and for all. Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball's now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is number one, above everything else. He wants the war to end, and I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Well, just to add to the Secretary's comments, the Ukrainian delegation today made...
Mike Walz speaking here. Let's stay with this live just for a moment.
Share President Trump's vision for peace. They share his determination to end the fighting, to end the killing, to end the tragic meat grinder of people and national treasure that's happening on the front in Ukraine. Number one. Number two, they made concrete steps and concrete proposals, not only accepting our proposal for a full ceasefire, which you can see the details of which are in our joint statement that we released together, but we also got into substantive details on how this war is going to permanently end. what type of guarantees they're going to have for their long-term security and prosperity, but also really looking at what it's going to take to finally end this, the horrific fighting. The other piece that I just want to make very clear is President Trump started this diplomatic effort in the Oval Office, talking to both leaders, both President Putin and President Zelensky back to back. And now that shuttle diplomacy continues. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Russian side. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Ukrainian side. I will talk to my Russian counterpart in the coming days. Secretary Rubio will be with G7 foreign ministers
CEO Council here at the White House,
in the next
where
couple
he met
of
with key
days.
leaders
We
in
have the NATO
technology
Secretary
industry.
General.
And last night,
Okay, we're going to pull away there. We're getting a bit of a cross wire there. I'm not quite sure where from, but we get some of the thrust of what we're hearing there, and it was pretty significant stuff, wasn't it, from Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, and Mike Waltz, President Trump's national security advisor there. And from what we heard there, well, it sounded like some significant movement on both sides of that table in Jeddah today. And we can talk to Tim Marshall now, the global security analyst and author, who's always welcome and who's on the line now. Hi to you, Tim.
Hello, John. I agree with your idea that is pretty significant. Everything we just heard there from both men. Rubio took the words out of my mouth. The ball's in Russia's court now. So I think what we can read into it, because there was a lot stated, but I think there were things in it that weren't stated. It's clear Ukraine has bent. It's clear that the fire breathed upon them has got them this far. I'm not making a case for or against that. And then Rubio would not be going out so far and so enthusiastically unless he really does think. Then let's come to what Waltz said. The negotiating team is in place, theirs, the Ukrainians, and he says that the Russians are getting theirs together. What I read into that is something that I've been pondering the last few days. Why are the Europeans still engaged in talking about this stabilization force? All 30 nations. I think reading through these runes that, and when I think it was Waltz that said, looking at what security guarantees Ukraine can be given. Yeah, I mean I think that was quite a statement. Well, I think what might lie behind that is that he knows that if they can pull off their part of it, the Europeans may still put up some sort of stabilization force.
Yes, which is exactly what they've been talking about in Paris today. The the whys and wherefores, how many countries, and it sounds like a good many in principle are ready to either put troops in or to back up that force on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, to guard that ceasefire. And like you, Tim, when I heard Waltz use the word security guarantees, I was wondering, look, are we looking there at significant movement by the White House? Because last time they got together in the Oval Office, there was no sign of America being willing to give any kind of security force, multinational force in Ukraine, any kind of security guarantee. And there the words were uttered.
Yeah, sorry to come across you. Yeah, those were the two words that were not spoken, security guarantees. Now, we're still left with the issue of the security backstop, of whether the Americans will or won't. But if there's enough... Oh, and I think also they've said that the minerals deal is just about done and dusted. And... I mean, America can try and sell this that, well, look, if all our companies are in there, Russia wouldn't dare do this. I think there's still quite a lot of gaps where things can go wrong and the whole thing can be called off. But I really do think this is a significant step forward, what we've just heard those two guys say.
Yeah, and we're forced to sort of, put what they're saying through a sieve and a mincer and see what we can make of it all. But, I mean, maybe just joining the closest two dots together where the minerals deal is concerned. If they have agreed on a minerals deal, then that suggests that maybe America would do more than simply say, look, let us invest in minerals there, and the Russians wouldn't dare march into your territory, because that argument did not wash with Zelensky, did not wash with Keir Starmer, did not wash with France, did not wash with the others. And if America have moved on that to the point of some sort of umbrella protection for Ukraine, if there's a ceasefire, they don't necessarily have to have boots on the ground. I don't imagine, I don't guess we're going to see that. But if there's going to be some sort of air cover, maybe from just beyond the border of NATO in Poland and that sort of thing, that would still be an advance on the American position, wouldn't it?
Yes, and it's a fig leaf for everyone else to say, well, they are doing something. And two more things. One, look where most of the most valuable rare earth metals are in Ukraine. They are in the east, very close to the Russian border. Second, and it's related to this, is Russia going to double-cross Putin in a year, 2 years, 3 years? I doubt it. I mean, I'm not saying they're not up for double-crossing people, but I just think that if part of the deal that they're speaking to the Russians is about, look, we're going to invest in this, don't spoil things for us.
Yes,
you do not want to go about double-crossing this particularly White House.
No, well, you'd have thought not, except until this press conference, we were wondering, on an hourly basis, is Donald Trump pretty much in lockstep with Putin? So,
but John, I've said to you from the beginning that at some point they will breathe fire on Russia. He said before he was inaugurated,
he did say that.
I'm going to say to them, you come to the table, you come to the table. Whichever one of you doesn't come to if either one of you don't come to the table, I'll pour heat on you. So they're both on warning. It's good news, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah, on both those fronts, absolutely right. Rachel and Tim are here with me. Tim,
I don't know if you saw some of our listeners won't have seen the body language or the expressions on the Rubio and Waltz's faces, but I know Rubio a little bit, and he has looked miserable as sin over the last few weeks. His face in the Oval Office during that Zelensky, Trump, Vance encounter couldn't have spoke more volumes. At the end of that press conference, Tim, he was grinning like a Cheshire cat. Suddenly, what he's wanted, been a big critic of Russia over the years. It's almost like the State Department, the Rubio doctrine, the common sense side of this administration may have reasserted itself. I don't know whether you sort of took a little bit of that as well, but I haven't seen Rubio as pleased for a very, very long time.
Well, you've added a bit extra background, so thank you, because I wasn't able to see. I only heard it. But I do know he went in with a big thumbs up and a big smile, and you're absolutely right. His face during the Zelensky dressing down was awful. It was sad. Yeah. And Trump has made it pretty obvious. He actually said to him in public, you're not a deal maker. Before he became president, he said to Rubio, "You're not a deal maker." And he's also said publicly, "You better do a deal now." So, he was kind of like, he needed this. Yeah. So, but the fact that if Waltz is there as well, and Waltz is just as enthusiastic as Rubio, because I think Trump's got Waltz's back more than he's got Rubio's back. Yeah, so I don't think Rubio's not spinning it. It looks like it's for real.
I mean, we have to assume that in the course of today, while they were thrashing out what they have thrashed out, that the Americans have been in constant touch with the Oval Office, and Donald Trump's given it the thumb up along the way. Were it not for that, being a sort of, cynic and very suspicious, you'd wonder whether Rubio has just gone out on a limb here and hoping that Donald Trump is going to sign up to it later.
Marco Rubio's last day as Secretary of State.
Yeah. I don't think you try and bounce Donald Trump into things, do you? I had a question for Tim about some comments that Trump actually made a couple of days ago, end of last week, when he talked about getting the two sides to negotiate, and he said Ukraine will negotiate because they have no choice, and then he said and Russia have no choice he said something like for a reason that only I know, that was quite cryptic. There's been some speculation about what that reason might be, what that leverage could be. We know that Putin wants fresh elections in Ukraine, and that could potentially be a bargaining chip. I wondered if you, Tim, as somebody who watches this very closely, had any thoughts or any speculation about what that secret reason might be.
Only wild conspiracy theories, so don't take this seriously. But he wants this out of the way. He's got other things to do. But also, who supplies Russia with all their drones, more or less? Iran does. Iran is heating up. He wants to get either busy putting maximum pressure on Iran, and he doesn't. If they were to smash Iran, and this is what I mean about. I was reluctant almost to go here because it really is just sort of 2 and 2 and maybe making 5. But I do know that one of the reasons it's in Jeddah. is because Saudi is a massive player vis-a-vis Iran and the Middle East. So
that's fascinating. I hadn't thought about that.
No, because if they go and smash Iran, then Iran can't supply Russia with one of its most crucial weapons, which is drones. So that might be in the mix, but I want to backtrack terribly badly, do a reverse ferry and say I have no idea if that's what Mr. Trump meant.
None of us do. None of us do.
No, look, I mean, holding forth in a vacuum is what we do in this a lot of the time. And again, sort of a little bit of the same. We've all been seeing some of the reporting out of Washington in recent days, sort of unattributably reported stuff from near to Donald Trump, suggesting that what America wanted from the talks today was somehow to see that President Zelensky of Ukraine's scalp was on the table, that it was somehow in the mix. Well, if that had been the case, they couldn't have got this deal today because Ukraine could not have agreed to that. And it was also suggested in the same sort of reporting that what Washington wanted was a clear statement by Ukraine that not only were they going to cease fighting for the occupied territories of Ukraine, the Donbass, Crimea and so on, but they would basically renounce their sovereignty of those areas. Again, that would have been a red line, Tim, wouldn't it? And
it would.
And we have to assume that wasn't part of what was... if America wanted that, they didn't press it.
They may have done in private, but they weren't rude enough for once to say it in public, because there was one thing, and I've forgotten whether it was Rubio or Waltz. I think it was Waltz. Rubio had said that they weren't getting maps out on the table, and maybe that is true. But there was something that Waltz said that just made me think that they have been talking about lines and where they may end up being drawn. I think they have been talking about that.
Tim, always good to get your thoughts and your judgment on these things as the story breaks. I mean, you can bet we're going to be back to you, Tim, because you can bet that we always will be. Tim Marshall there, foreign writer, author of Prisoners of Geography, and more coming up. Going to be talking to one of the leading politicians in Ukraine in just a moment to get a reaction to what we've been discussing, what we've been reporting from there in the Ukrainian capital. You're listening to Pienaar and Friends with Rachel Cunliffe, with Tim Montgomerie, and of course with me, John Pienaar. And at 6:30, let's get the headlines with Laura Cook.
John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion. Empower your employees to feel good about their pension. Search NatWest Cushion today. Capital at risk.
I'm John Pienaar. This is Pienaar and Friends with Tim Montgomerie, with Rachel Cunliffe and Kate Borsay, who takes over at 7 o'clock. And she's here. Hello, Kate.
Hello, John. We're just digging into the detail of what you've been covering. That's a live statement from Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Both looked buoyed by the news that Ukraine has agreed to accept an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire. That will then go to Russia. And I think this is the start of something. It's certainly not the conclusion. We've heard nothing about security guarantees, for example, but they will come as part of a broader ceasefire and an end to the war if we get to that stage. Of course, we know the US will lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine. So we're just trying to dig into the wording here and establish what that means. The intelligence sharing, well, that's obvious in terms of military aid. I presume, we certainly haven't heard yet that will begin to flow again. And it feels like this is the US saying, you have given us that, you've given us your agreement to take this proposed 30-day ceasefire to Russia, and so therefore we are giving you your intelligence sharing back in exchange. But just digging into the detail on that, we'll get reaction from Ukraine and across the board this evening. And for something a bit different, John, Cheltenham fans are heading to Benidorm this week. Did you know about this? Well, it's essentially, because it's combined with St Patrick's Day, a whole load of Brits have flocked to Spain for the occasion to get a bit of sun and to enjoy the occasion. There's a whole flock of them out there. We'll be speaking to the Times' racing correspondent tonight about this sort of brand new thing for Cheltenham. We'll dig into the detail and we'll talk a little bit about the festival, of course, which has kicked off already. That is for something a little bit lighter. We'll dig into Manchester United and that new mega stadium that's been announced today that looks very red from the pictures, doesn't it? Surprise,
yes,
surprise. I'm sure it's not going to be that red in real life.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be speaking to Phil Bardsley about that. He started his career, of course, at Manchester United.
Yeah.
One of the many guests on tonight's show.
All right, look forward to that. 7 o'clock with you, Kate, here on Times Radio. Now, welcome to the programme, Alexander Merezko, the Ukrainian MP, who's chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Kyiv. Alexander, welcome back to the programme.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're always welcome, Alexander. Tell me, first of all, I mean, you've had a chance to cast your eye over the statements after the meetings in Jeddah. What do you make of it? What are your thoughts?
Well, to me, it was quite unexpected because I thought that the negotiations will continue, will drag on maybe for days and so on. But I think politically it's a good situation for Ukraine because, first of all, the United States showed its will to peace. It made this offer regarding ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed, and now the ball is in the court of Putin. And we'll see what will be his reaction because Ukraine has agreed to this offer, to this ceasefire without any conditions whatsoever. And now we'll be watching very closely what Putin has to say about this. But from my own experience, I call these situations a triumph of hope over experience.
Yeah,
because
sorry, go ahead, Alexander.
Previous experience is about that Russians had violated all kinds of ceasefires previously during the Minsk process.
Yes. And most immediately, Alexander, to see the block on intelligence sharing and the supply of US weapons, well, that was the immediate, I don't even call it a breakthrough. It was the removal of an obstacle which should never, arguably should never have been there. It put lives at risk, it put troops at risk on the battlefield, and now we're told America's going to lift that block, which will come as an enormous relief to your troops, but also to your people in the cities of Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely true. I didn't expect it to happen either. To me, it's a very important, pleasant surprise, and to Ukrainian people that the United States continues to stand with Ukraine, continues to be our ally. After all these disappointments, it's very uplifting, it's very encouraging for us.
Yeah,
and it's a true sensation.
Yeah, Rachel Cunliffe and Tim Montgomerie are here. Again, we're doing a lot of speculating here, and I'm going to speculate, to the nth degree now, by just speculating. The fact that America have lined up with Ukraine in support of putting together what would be a joint proposal from Ukraine for a ceasefire. Are they sticking their necks out here? Do they have no idea whether or not Russia are going to accept this? Or by the channels, the back channels, behind the back channels that we kind of know are there, has there been some sort of word between the Kremlin and the White House that this will get the necessary reception? What's your thought on that?
Well, in politics, we know that we see only the tip of the iceberg, and I'm sure that there are back channels. There must have been some kind of communication between shuttle diplomacy, as it is called, between the US and Russia. And I don't rule out that there have been preliminary maybe agreements made between Trump and Putin. I don't rule out. But, well, we'll wait and see, because very soon we'll find out whether Putin will attach any kind of conditions or demands. For example, he might demand withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Kursk region. I don't know. But he is very kind of treacherous, very perfidious politician, unscrupulous, and we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, well, look, of course, you're right to be sceptical, and more than sceptical. Everyone here will certainly understand that. Tim Montgomerie and Rachel Cunliffe here, Tim.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, using the expression that I think Marco Rubio used as well. The ball is now in Putin's court, and it will be very interesting. Imagine if Putin doesn't now accept these terms. You know, as you said, Ukraine have accepted these ceasefire terms without conditions. If Putin was now to sort of quibble, it would be very interesting really to test then the American reaction, because I think Trump does deserve some credit for putting the whole idea of stopping this war onto the agenda. It wasn't really on the agenda during the Biden years or during even the end of Biden's time in office. Trump has put this peace talks on the agenda, which I think is to his credit. How he's gone about it, well, we can that is a much more controversial area. But now there's a test, not just for Putin in accepting these terms, but if Putin doesn't accept them, it's a massive test for Trump as well, and how he reacts.
Alexander?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And, you know, it seems like there is a very sophisticated political game is going on. And what politicians say, I mean, Trump and Putin, doesn't necessarily mean what they really imply, what is like beneath the surface. And as of now, we are waiting for reaction of Putin. And after that, all the eyes will be set on Trump. What will be his reaction?
Yes. I mean, as you say, ball in Putin's court in so many different ways. I want to come back to one or two points in a moment, but Rachel.
Well, I just think it's interesting, Alexander, you mentioned there that Russia has violated ceasefires before. That is exactly the point that President Zelensky was trying to make in the Oval Office before it all kicked off with J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, and they didn't seem particularly sort of warm to that point. And I just, picking up from what Tim said about how Trump fits into all of this, there has been a sense up until now that maybe he's underestimated the dynamics at play, the psychology of Putin, or that Trump thinks that he can get Putin to act in a particular way. I guess I just think maybe Trump knows something that we all don't. But from the history of how Putin has viewed Ukraine and Russian expansionism over the past few decades, have we had any signs? Is there any reason to believe that this time might be different? Or is the difference that the White House is just so unpredictable at the moment that does change the state of play?
Yes, there is one difference, an important one, and this difference is called Trump, because we'll see whether it is a deterrent enough effect for Putin, because Putin is scared of Trump. He considers him to be unpredictable. And we'll see whether from now on, Trump is going to be a sort of, psychologically speaking, guarantor of this ceasefire. And we'll see whether Putin is scared enough of Trump to continue to hold, to abide by this ceasefire.
Well, yet to be seen to what extent Trump, and in what form Trump is prepared to give any kind of security guarantee, first to a peacekeeping force if there is one in Ukraine. And beyond that, the long-term security of Ukraine, if this ceasefire happens, if this rolling 30-day ceasefire becomes established, Ukraine will not want that. You will not want that, Alexander, purely to be an opportunity for Vladimir Putin to rearm and to re-recruit and to get more troops ready for frontline action. You will want to use that, Alexander, won't you, to do something to build up Ukraine's defences, not just to fight another war. You hope and pray that won't happen, but to be in a position to deter another attack, and that's going to take a lot of effort.
Yes, absolutely. You know, on the one hand, for us to have 30 days without being killed when we hope that Russians will stop killing us, it's important. We'll save some lives during this. That's why we remain hopeful despite all odds. And at the same time, we should take into consideration that Putin needs this ceasefire because this year, on the 9th of May, it's a very kind of sacred symbolic date for Putin, Victory Day. It's 80th anniversary. And that's why he needs this ceasefire to prove that he's kind of winner, you know, and he's not losing, something like that. So he might need it for propagandistic goals also.
And just another point in this statement from the two sides, which will be enormously important on a very human level, Alexandra, to you and the people of Ukraine, where it talks about the delegations, Ukrainian and American, having discussed the importance of humanitarian relief. And under that heading, they talk about the exchange of prisoners of war, the release of civilian detainees, and the return of forcibly transferred Ukrainian children. Now, we're talking there about thousands of children in those occupied areas that were taken from their families, taken to Russia, redistributed among Russian families with the idea of making them a part of Russian families and Russia. And there are many families in Ukraine, aren't there, Alexandra, feeling the pain of that loss. And that's something that matters. And getting Russia to agree to reverse those things, well, that to Russia, they'll see that as a big ask, won't they?
Yeah, absolutely. There are more than 20,000 such children which had been kidnapped from the occupied territories. I know, for example, there are parents who lived in the occupied territories, and Russians told them that we take these your children for summer camps, and they never returned them. You know, there are lots of such stories, but, you know, it's under Convention of 1948 on the prevention of genocide. This is an act of genocide. Yeah. When you kidnap children and you're trying to erase their identity, cultural, national identity. This is exactly what Putin is doing, and that's why he had this arrest warrant from the ICC. But I strongly doubt, unfortunately, I want to believe that Putin will return these children, but unfortunately, I doubt that it will happen.
That is a desperately sad thought. But Alexandra, I know you are so busy now this evening in the aftermath of what we've heard. So I will let you go. Thank you for joining us again, and hopefully we can talk again before too very long. Alexandra Merezhko, Ukrainian MP, who's chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Kyiv. More coming up on this breaking story. More discussion with Tim Montgomerie, Rachel Cunliffe, and me, John Pienaar, on Times Radio in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
The Money Moment.
Here with me on Pienaar Friends, as is Rachel Cunliffe from the Statesman. We're digesting the developments in Jeddah, where the American and the Ukrainian teams have come to an agreement, and some of the obstacles which threaten to derail the whole process of discussion between Ukraine and the US seem to have been overcome. They will now be putting forward this proposal, at least for a 30-day rolling ceasefire, and challenging Russia to run with that. Will Russia go with that idea? They talked about putting back on train the idea of a minerals deal between Ukraine and the USA, which opens up, I guess, again, the argument about America guaranteeing the security of Ukraine in the light of that minerals business agreement, and other things too. Now, I want to bring you this, because it is of interest. This is Sergei Markov, who's formerly very close to Vladimir Putin, now commentates in Moscow on Russian politics. And what he says, by way of his reaction, is this. And it's a pretty dismissive analysis from the Russian pro-Putin man. He says here, 1, Ukraine pretends to agree with the US proposal. The US will demand such a ceasefire from Russia. Russia, he then says, will refuse the ceasefire. And then, the fourth prediction, America will start to harshly pressure Russia and increase sanctions against Russia and increase military supplies to Ukraine. And then, says Markov, the US will fully return to the war party coalition. He says the plan was developed by the leaders of France and Britain for Zelensky. Now, so that's not an official Kremlin spokesman, but it's someone who has in the past spoken very much with one voice with the Kremlin, and he's putting a pretty dark interpretation on this from the Kremlin's point of view, which I suppose, from the point of view of Ukraine and Ukraine's friends, is maybe kind of encouraging. If Russia, Tim and Rachel, if they anticipate that America will now row in with Ukraine and with their friends in Europe and elsewhere and demand that Russia fall into line, well, that is a development which one would have hoped to see.
Well, is that what we hope to see? My hope...
Well, that we wish to see Russia put under a good deal of pressure now to line up with
You absolutely want Russia under good pressure. But part of my hope has always been is that the State Department or the White House have had a basic understanding with Russia for a long time that Russia does want to end this war, because let's not forget, Russia has lost lots of troops in this war as well, and it never got close to Kiev. It's making some progress on the battlefront, but it's lost certain Russian territory to Ukraine. It has suffered from this war as well, of its own making, absolutely, but it has suffered from its war. And my hope has always been that it was Ukraine that was, in a way, needed to be dragged to the negotiating table, because Ukraine had all the legitimate anger on their part and to not give up anything to Russia. So my hope would now be that Russia would accept these terms for immediate ceasefire in the next day or two. But in a way, I would worry. It'd be good if the pressure is on Russia, but if Russia are about to reject this, then we're in a whole different ball game.
Oh no, I think I was welcoming the idea of the pressure rather than the Russian rejection. The worry would have been, I guess, that Russia is not in the market for any kind of ceasefire, because, yes, they are exhausted by the war. Yes, it's true they've lost some 700,000 troops. Yes, it's true that inflation is very high in Russia. Yes, it's true interest rates are high. Yes, it's true that the ruble is under enormous pressure. All of those things. But the Russian hope, from another perspective, was that they were seeing Ukraine suffer considerably. And they could have kept up the pressure for a while longer, maybe months longer, especially if America was not fully in Ukraine's corner. Well, now we will see. If America turns out to be in Ukraine's corner, then maybe the pressure is right back on Russia, and maybe they will accede to a ceasefire, which is not necessarily what Putin hoped to see. I think we can say not necessarily. He would not wish to see a ceasefire on those terms. And then you get, well, Rachel, what's your thoughts so far?
Well, my first thought, listening to those comments, that interpretation, is the Kremlin's perspective is always that Britain is behind it. So they have it's interesting, they have a view of the United Kingdom and our capabilities as being the sort of behind the scenes
Iran
operators.
usually thinks the same, doesn't it?
It's not a Britain that I recognise, but it's nice to know that someone has faith in our capabilities. But being slightly less flippant and more serious for a moment, it's going to be really interesting to see how the Trump White House reacts, how Donald Trump reacts if Vladimir Putin pushes back on this. If he sets any kind of terms for a ceasefire, if they agrees a ceasefire and then breaks it, and if he is reluctant to move towards a peace process, because one of the things we've learned about Trump is that he absolutely hates even the suggestion that he is being made a fool of. And if he puts all this effort in, the last couple of weeks, the extraordinary, shocking actions of the US in that Oval Office meeting and in the withdrawal of intelligence sharing to get Ukraine to the table, and then Vladimir Putin messes it all up for America. Trump is there left looking very, very foolish and very naive for trusting Putin. And I think that the reaction from a Trump White House to that kind of humiliation will be really quite acute. So watch very, very carefully.
Do you know what the thing I'm most watching out for though now?
What?
Is I want Trump to be on the television soon backing what Rubio said. Because that's the one sort of glimmer of light you could see for, an idea that Trump is in Putin's hands, is that he will say that it wasn't my negotiating tactic, it was Rubio's negotiating. So let's hear Trump come on television and back what has been said in Jeddah as soon as possible. Because the longer the delay there is, the more I think, is the White House fully behind this?
Well, that was why I expressed the hope that hopefully the American delegation was in touch with the Oval Office. But Rachel, you so put your finger on it there. It's a bit of a test of Trump, this. And when we're talking about putting pressure on Russia, a few more banking sanctions and a few more trade sanctions will not cut it by a million miles.
No, and especially given that the rhetoric from the Trump White House the last couple of weeks has been so one-sided. Trump has talked about Russia having all the cards, Ukraine having none of the cards. He's echoed Russian talking points about how it was Ukraine that started the war. He's echoed talking points about Zelensky needing to go and being a dictator, being corrupt and all the rest of it. So it would be quite a sort of dramatic about turn for Trump to go, right, Ukraine, you're behaving, Russia, ball's in your court. Are you going to match it? Yeah,
and now, having got to this point, yes, a test of Trump, a challenge for Trump, definite progress as far as it goes, and it puts a focus right back. Well, there's so many different focuses here, but one of them is on Paris now tomorrow, where today we've seen the defence chiefs of Britain, of France, of a large number of nations. I mean, Australia was there, others were there. Tomorrow it's going to be the defence ministers of those nations gathered in Paris, and we're going to be watching that meeting to see, okay, where are you with this plan for a ceasefire safeguarding force in Ukraine? Have you got it together? What does it look like? What are the orders going to be? And what sort of guarantee are you going to get from America to make sure if there's a threat from Russia, you can look that threat in the eye? Tomorrow in Paris is going to be a big day, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what I think we're waiting for is the commitment, really, is there's obviously this immediate ceasefire, but I think these troops for the peacekeeping stabilisation force are for a more of a long-term ceasefire. What we don't know is how quickly we might move to peace in these negotiations, and you'd hope it might happen quite quickly. So yeah, Europe has to be ready.
Okay. Can I just say something about this Paris meeting, and that we shouldn't things are moving very, very quickly. Trump is, the announcements today from America have shaken up the news agenda yet again. But we should still stress how unprecedented it is to have this meeting of military chiefs about NATO security without the presence of the US. And yes, that's what Trump wanted. He wanted sort of European leaders to step up, and they're showing that they are willing to do that and that they can do it. But even if everything does go entirely best case scenario to plan, things have changed. The global order has changed, and I think this meeting, without the presence of America, really demonstrates that.
Yeah, let me just add this, or rather, it's Sergei Markov adding this by way of his analysis of what's been going on. And he here, I think it's on Telegram, the social media channel, anticipates a Russian response. And here is Markov's suggestion, the former Putin man. And that is, yes, to a 30-day truce, but countries sign up not to supply weapons to Ukraine during the truce. And Markov says that would be fair because all those countries are participating in a proxy war with Russia, says Markov. They too must participate in the truce. Now, might that be an early echo, if an echo can be early, of what we're going to be hearing from the Kremlin? Because you can see Kremlin, you can very easily imagine the Kremlin saying that. Of course, the answer is that Russia will be resupplying like crazy. They will not be embargoing themselves when it comes to reinforcing their front line. So why on earth should the friends of of Ukraine do any such thing. But it just makes the point that we've been making, Tim and Rachel, that with the news this evening, it's a stage and a significant stage, but it's just another step on what will still be a pretty rocky journey.
Yeah. Well, that's why one of the good statements from this statement in Jeddah today is the Americans didn't attach the resumption of security assistance and intelligence sharing to a ceasefire. Or they said it was immediate, and so let's hope they keep by that word too.
All right, Tim Montgomerie, great to have you here. Rachel, lovely to talk to you too. Thank you to you for listening during this significant development in the story of Ukraine. Ori Cole was our producer. Isaac Marley was our technical operator. I'm going to be back tomorrow at 4:00 with another stage in this really remarkable journey. Thanks for listening. Kate Boss is up next here on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It's 7:00. This is Kate Borsay and the Evening Edition. Coming up...
We'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes to peace. The ball's now in their court.
This could be an historic day in the Russia-Ukraine peace negotiations. Ukraine says it's ready to accept a US proposal for an initial 30-day ceasefire with Russia. We've got full analysis on this latest move throughout the Evening Edition tonight. The Trump dump returns will be flooding the zone with all the day's moves from